Hi, my name's Jessica Stewart and I'm Head of Sustainability and Community Development at Ginninderry. You're with us today on the Inspire podcast, where we talk to experts and visionaries about how we can inspire a new way of living for a brighter future. I'd like to start off by acknowledging the country that we're recording on today. We are so privileged to be able to live, work and learn on country that First Nations people have had a connection to for many, many thousands of years. We would like to honour and acknowledge their ongoing custodianship. Today I'm joined by the incredible Jo Farrell. Jo is a champion for women in the construction industry. She's General Manager of Kane Constructions ACT, the founder of a not-profit Build Like a Girl, and is the 2024 recipient of the ACT Australian of the Year. Welcome to the podcast, Jo.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm neither an expert nor a visionary, but anyway, let's see what we can do about it.
Awesome. So you're obviously a builder, Jo. We talk a lot about the construction industry being a really male-dominated space. What drew you to the industry in the first place? How did you get into it?
Yeah, so construction's third largest employer in Australia and remains the most male-dominated. That used to be mining and defence, but they've made massive inroads in getting gender equity and I think broader diversity and inclusion embedded in their industry. So when construction's worse than mining, I think we've got a problem. So what drew me to it? I think I've always loved the whole concept of it. I see building as artistry. It's a whole bunch of people looking at a drawing and a piece of paper and creating something out of that that's tangible, that you can see and touch and feel. And so, and I know when you look at tradies, you sort of go, you don't think of artists when you see them in their high vis, but that's kind of how I always saw it. And so even as a kid playing with Lego, apparently Mum said I used to hoard Lego. And if my Barbie dolls that she always used to try and buy me couldn't be used as structural foundations or trusses, then the Barbies were chucked back in the box and the Lego. And I used to drive my brother mad because I used to sort of hoard it all. So it was always just an attraction.
Always ingrained in your DNA.
Yeah.
And so you started out as an apprentice carpenter and you've brought in something today from that time, your first tool belt.
Yep.
Can we have a bit of a look?
Yes. Yes, you can.
So for those that are just listening to us on the podcast, you can actually take a look at Jo's tool belt on the Ginninderry social media pages on Facebook and Instagram. And you can also watch this whole podcast on the Ginninderry YouTube channel. So this tool belt in front of us, Jo, looks pretty old and worn.
Like me? Yep.
Yeah, feels pretty heavy. Give us a rundown of, where is it? What's the history of this?
So obviously it's something that's absolutely needed when you start out. And the first one I had was like this cheap kind of plasticky one that I bought from a hardware store, which was the cheapest thing. You don't get paid a lot as a first-year apprentice, particularly in 1996. So it was really difficult to build up my toolkit. And one of the things that the guys on site used to delight in doing is either stealing my tools or hiding my tools or breaking my tools. So that was kind of an added, challenge that I had to navigate. But obviously as you learn and you also earn more as you progress, I was able to invest in this. And so this is at the time was quite a high-end tool belt and is now 21 years old. So it certainly stood the test of time and it's actually travelled all over the world with me as well.
Incredible. And in terms of that, tool belts I'd imagine are sort of made for men predominantly. What are some other things on the construction site that make it a bit more challenging or harder for women in terms of either PPE or the equipment that we have or just the facilities? I think,
definitely now from an ergonomics perspective, all the tool belts now have inbuilt sort of suspenders and braces in them for back protection. So it's not just something that, as a female, I sort of struggle with. Certainly I've got lower back and hip issues from carting this around. You end up with about between 15 and 18 kilos once you've got all your tools in there sort of hanging off you because there's other bits and pieces that you hang. So, similar to what the police force did when they changed to vests from the tools because of the same sort of thing.
Right.
So you will find a lot of carpenters in particular who carry a lot of weight around their waist we all have lower back issues. In terms of the PPE, it was always had to wear men's boots, men's pants, men's shirts. Now that's thankfully changed. You have women who have gone out who have worked in industry and now created their own businesses around female workwear, which is fantastic. But yeah, back in my day, that didn't exist.
Back in the day. So there's been some good change, I suppose, and some small changes to allow women in the construction industry to just be able to work side by side with men. But, I obviously know that there's a lot of issues still with the industry. Do you want to chat about them and talk about, what are you still seeing in the construction industry that needs to change?
Yeah, well, you're right. There's been a lot of inroads made in terms of, I think, a lot of awareness and a lot of education done at both primary school and high school level about sort of crushing a lot of those stereotypes and stigmas surrounding sort of, women choosing not just a construction role per se, but particularly a trade role.
Yeah.
Female tradeswomen only make up 2% of the entire industry. We are such a small number. And it's a really lonely place. So it was incredibly lonely for me. To start off, I did my first 2 years in Wollongong where I grew up. When I went to TAFE in Wollongong, the female amenities were on the other side of the campus. So it used to take me 25 minutes to walk, and then I would get criticised for taking too long, sort of on breaks and different things just to use a bathroom. That was also like on a building site. So if there was never any female toilet, I had to share a toilet with men. And particularly when there were more men on the side, got pushed over in the Portaloo plenty of times, but also if it was a toilet block, it wasn't uncommon to sort of see guys peeking through the crack of the door and all that sort of stuff. You would think that doesn't exist anymore, but I get told about this stuff almost daily in terms of the same sorts of challenges that young women are facing now on building sites. So whilst lots of work has been done to try and educate, I think, young women, the education piece is missing for everybody else already in the industry who are making this place unwelcome and unsafe for women who actually just want to be a tradesperson. Yeah,
100%. And, something like providing toilets just seems like such a no-brainer and such an easy thing to do. But I suppose that education and re-challenging, I suppose, the industry and not just being apathetic about watching this stuff happen. What would you say to someone on a construction site that is seeing this stuff, and how would you suggest that they deal with some of these things?
We always talk about culture in construction needing to change, and there's this apathy is such a great word because I've been using it so much of late in trying to explain this to people. And the way I look at the industry now, having been in the industry for 28 years and seen changes and kind of lots and lots of forward motion, but then backward steps as well. And what I'm sort of seeing and what I'm trying to explain to people is the group of people in the industry who are predominantly men, but also some women as well, who are negative and toxic and not having, I guess, the kind of outlook that women should just be, and all sorts of people from diverse backgrounds should be very much welcomed when we've got one of the largest skill shortages that we've had since World War II. So, we're talking about 90,000 workers that we need in the next couple of years. Women make up 50% of the population. Migrant workers are another, I think, great, way of plugging the skills gap as well. 100%. We have all these options there, but we have all of these discriminatory practices and behaviours and attitudes that exist in the industry. But those behaviours and attitudes make up only about 20 or 25%. It's actually a small group of people who are the actual problem. And where I find that if you want to actually implement or see cultural change, it's the rest of us who are standing there with that apathy, with that bystander effect. I'll give you some examples that I see all the time and some that have actually been told to me of late. So, when you're standing there and this happens a lot on a construction site, and someone will tell a really off-colour joke. Yeah. And we all have a sliding scale of where our line is that doesn't get crossed, and that differs for everybody, right? But I think we all have a bit of a common line of what doesn't get crossed. So standing in a group setting, someone tells this joke that's sexist joke. And it's not right, and someone should say something, but no one says a word. That is the moment that you could have actually changed our culture if you'd spoken up, and you missed that moment because we don't want to make it uncomfortable and we don't want to make it awkward. But what's awkward is the offence that we feel and the fact that we kind of go, oh, that's not right, but we say nothing. I'll give you another example. Yeah. Young lady came up to me a couple of weeks ago, and she's a site engineer, and she said, I was doing an inspection on site. There was a whole bunch of people, men and women. She's the youngest site engineer on the site, and the project manager, while they were looking at this trench, put his arm around her and cuddled her in close and had his arm around her waist and on her hip and chat. And she was incredibly uncomfortable, and she didn't know how to deal with it because this guy was so much older, in a position of power, didn't know how to navigate it. Yeah. Afterwards, some of the other men and women came to her and went, wow, that was really creepy. But at the time, they didn't say anything. And that was your moment to change the culture and speak up, and you missed it. Or the worst one that happens, I'll give you the 3 examples and we can break them down. When in an organisation, there's a promotion, there's a role that's going, there's a managerial role, or, there's a high level role going, and there's men and women going for that, but that woman is the best person for that job and everyone knows it. Yeah. And the other women in that organisation don't go into that director or the boss or whoever and say, pick her because she's the best one for the role. She's may not be the most qualified, but she's the best person for that role, and they don't speak up. That is how we change culture. That was your moment, and you missed it. Yeah. And that is how you actually create the change, and everybody is just standing back expecting someone else to do it.
Yeah, and it's interesting that when they do speak up, even after the fact, that it's the woman that they go and talk to and say, oh, that wasn't a nice thing to have happened to you. Yeah. Not the man that was perpetrating it in the first place.
Well, it's anything that happens to a woman is a woman's problem in our culture, in our society. That's not just a construction thing.
Yeah, and do you feel that weight for you as well, that it's only women speaking about the importance of women in construction and trying to lift the bar for women in construction, that it is mostly women that are doing that heavy lifting?
Oh, absolutely. The onus of responsibility is on us. We have to change the culture. We have to change the stereotype. We have to make people behave and think differently. And everybody's standing back going, well, if you want to change it, go and change it. And that's fine, we will. But you then don't get to whinge and complain about how bad things are, or even worse, appropriate other people's stories when you're standing there doing nothing. Yeah. And I think you don't get to criticise. You don't get to throw stones from the cheap seats when you're not in the trenches there with us doing the hard yards. And I think that apathy, that bystander effect, is far more, toxic, far more negative and detrimental than the small group of people who are actually making, the construction industry unwelcome.
Yeah. And so you mentioned also that we have less than 2% females on site and on the tools, and only about 12% of women in the whole of the construction force in Australia. But you've still managed to get Kane Construction and your team from 6% of women in Kane Construction in the ACT from the start of 2020 to now sitting at about 48% from the end of 2022. Has that tell us about that change and how that's changed the culture at Kane?
So when I stepped into Kane at the beginning of 2020, there was only one other female in the business, and then I sort of stepped in, and first thing I did was speak to her and say, well, how does this feel for you? And she said, it's horrible. And she actually didn't feel comfortable around some of the people that were in the business. The business was in a problematic place from we had, unhappy clients. We had a poor culture. Every metric that you would measure a construction business in terms of key performance, we were failing at that. Right. So I knew that I had my work cut out for me. And when I spoke to one of my mentors who, she's obviously a CEO of a company, and she said, any sort of cultural change, any sort of major change in a business has to happen in 3 months. Otherwise, you've accepted it. And that's like a mindset thing. And so she said, anything you want to do or have to do, you must do within a 3-month period. So I just brought the entire team in and said, I'm here now. This is our culture. This is our values. This is who we are. And you're either in or you're out. I had 3 guys get up and walk out of that meeting saying, I'm not going to work for a woman. Wow. And that was the statement. It was not me as a person per se or what I'd said about culture and values. It was just, we won't work for a woman. And so I thought, okay, that's the starting point. At least you've declared yourselves, because not everybody was that forthcoming. And so it was just a change of going, well, who are the people who align with our values and who want to see diversity, who want to see equity, who want to see all these things in place. And so it was about getting the right people in who aligned with that. And one of the things we did was speak to all the recruiters and say, if we're advertising for a role, we want a male and a female candidate. We want diversity. We want to see what you can do. And if you can't provide that, then you're not doing your job as a recruiter.
Amazing. And is Kane an outlier this space?
Not anymore.
Great.
I think that we threw a challenge down. So the first thing I did was employ a female operations manager, which is Pip Selden, who's not only my best mate, but also probably one of the best in the business. And so what we wanted to demonstrate, and we sit side by side, and I openly and almost daily sort of say that we swap roles every single day. So sometimes she's in charge, sometimes I'm in charge. We share that. And the first thing we wanted to demonstrate, particularly to women, was it's not just about one of us sitting at the top. Because one of the other things that women do really poorly and men do fantastically is make space for each other. We have been conditioned to think there's only room for one of us and we're going to fight like hell to get there. Having Pip and I together side by side meant all of a sudden there were two of us. And that was the first time that two women had been sitting at that level in a business that size and openly acknowledging that we were sitting there together. And that was a really important step for us to take to show other women that there's room for everybody and you've got to bring people with you. So that then kind of started to ripple out into other businesses. So I know that there are several other businesses now who have caught up to us just about in terms of the split of their business and have also made major inroads. And they've actually spoken to me about it, which is really nice. We're working with other construction companies who any day of the week we could be in competition with to win a job, but they're willing to actually have a conversation with me from when I put my Build Like a Girl hat on to say, well, how do we do this? And so I'm helping them get more subcontractors with apprentices on board. I'm helping them with their, targets when they're trying to bid for ACT government work to meet the criteria.
Yeah.
So they're actually having a conversation, which I think is a really healthy change. So rather than be competitive, rather than be, us being an outlier, everybody is coming along with it, and I think that's a really positive thing.
And the whole industry will be better for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's not one that you want to be just flying streaks ahead of everyone. Bringing everyone along on that journey is really important.
But we don't want it tokenistic either.
No.
And I mean, that's the other thing to avoid is that there's a lot of box ticking, in terms of, and that's broadly in terms of criteria that you have to meet, particularly when you're bidding for government work. And I guess the great thing about ACT is it's such a progressive territory. They do want to see the industry step up in terms of Indigenous employment, veteran engagement, disability engagement. There's a number of things that we have to demonstrate within our business in terms of that. And they do hold us to account, which is good. But what we are mindful of is not having that box ticking criteria. So you saying, oh yeah, I've got 30% women in my business working on this project, but they're all sitting there doing administration roles, behind a desk. Yeah. That's not what we're talking about here.
No. And it's, unfortunately, you have to prove yourself, or not. So whether you're a male or a female, proving yourself in this industry and proving that you can do quality construction should be the most important thing.
Yeah. That is the metric. That is what you have to achieve.
Yeah. So you mentioned Build Like a Girl. Tell me a bit about that and what it does, and give it a plug.
Give it a plug. Build Like a Girl was the catalyst for just rage. So I stepped into Kane in early 2020. That created a bit of a buzz, a bit of a profile, if you will. And so all of a sudden I was getting inundated on social media with messages from other women telling me what their experiences have been. And it started off as a trickle and then became a tsunami of horrible experiences. And it started bringing up, I guess, my own history and maybe a lot of things that I'd kind of forced myself to forget about, to be honest. But these stories started triggering me in terms of going, that happened to me 20 years ago or 15 years ago or whatever that story was. So it started bringing up this kind of simmering anger and frustration and rage. And I sat there and said to myself, I can either just be really, really angry about this and do nothing, or I can be really, really angry and do something with it. So I did my best to channel all of that energy into something more positive. And I sat down at my dining room table one weekend and I thought, how do I come up with an idea that is going to fix this problem? And it's not going to fix it overnight, but it's going to be somewhere, a place where women can bring their problems, who can be heard, and I can then grab that and try and run with it the best that I can. And so I literally sat there and just created it in a weekend and kind of thought, I have no idea how I'm going to do this, but I need to create, it needs to be a not-for-profit organisation. It needs to be a charity. I need to be able to get money in the door that goes straight back to where it needs to be. And so I know it sounds easy to go, yeah, I created it in one weekend. It wasn't that simple, but that was kind of how it was born. And it was literally born out of rage. And it's that choice that we all get to make. And I keep saying this to people is we don't get to sit there and whinge and complain about the state of the world and do absolutely nothing about it. You have to choose. You either get to whinge and complain, but you're doing something positive to fix it, or be quiet, because we don't need more people complaining. We need doers, and we need to start fixing things because no one's coming to save us anymore. And that was the mentality behind it.
Yeah. And I think Build Like a Girl for people in Canberra or in the world nationally, right, is really about knowing who's out there, knowing who to support. If you need a carpenter, you can go to Build Like a Girl, and there's a whole list of that. If you want to look at recruiting and look at tradies that are in and looking for jobs, you can find it there. If you want to promote your work or your business in that way, or if you're looking for a candidate, it's a really good connector and that sort of networking bit in there as well. And so then in terms of the charity piece of that, what does Build Like a Girl do in that space?
Pretty much everything. So we, particularly the younger girls who are sort of coming out of school, or maybe you've been out of school, we've got a few who sort of popped out of school, didn't know what to do, kicked around for a couple of years and now said, this is what I want to do. It's really hard for them not to just to get a foothold, but to also understand that whilst apprentice wages have definitely improved since I started, it's still hard. That first couple of years is hard. So, some of them don't have driver's licenses, and that's an absolute necessary thing. And so, from the Spark program, I sort of borrowed, which Ginninderry have been fantastic with. All those things that you do, I sort of went, well, I have to do that too. So if we have to pay for driving lessons, there's money for driving lessons. If we have to pay for tool belts and toolkits, because it takes so much time and money to build up your toolkit. If you can't turn up on site as a carpenter with a nail gun, a hammer, all those sorts of things, you won't get employed. You won't be able to do your job. And one of the biggest things tradies hate is when you borrow each other's stuff. Right. So we kit the girls out with as much as we possibly can. Some of the negative things that we have to outlay money for is psychology and counselling services. So we've had a few girls late last year where we had some very, very serious sexual harassment and one sexual assault incident. And they had nowhere to go because one of the things that I found is that the services that are provided free of charge through various sort of construction wings, like you've got, AusHelp, you've got Mates in Construction, you've got TAX, you've got a number of things, but they're actually geared towards men. Yeah. Those services are geared towards male problems, centred around relationship issues and gambling, drug, alcohol addiction, those sorts of things. The problems we're dealing with young women in trades are very, very different to those problems and are largely based around gender. Largely based around their issues. And so I found that I was going out to these organisations to say, listen, there's this young lady who needs this help. And they weren't able to actually provide anyone that had some lived experience first and foremost, but could then actually listen to them and put some things in place. And they were coming back to me saying, Jo, I don't think we can help you. And so I've had to actually go out and source psychologists and counsellors who are well versed in women's sort of problems and navigating those problems. And so we've been paying for those as well, and they're not cheap. So it's just whatever it takes to keep them employed, to provide the support and to make sure that we can keep them within the industry. The first year female dropout rate for apprenticeships in construction is 72%. Wow. So, I mean, if I said to you, you're going to lose 72% of your bank account tomorrow, like you'd be freaking out, right? Exactly. And if I said 72% of your team are going to walk out the door tomorrow morning, it's a horrific number, and it's all born about this cultural piece, and it's born about the fact that they don't have support. So, every dollar and cent is poured back into those girls and those women, and it's not just in Canberra. We're dealing with them everywhere. So,
well, I think having mentors like you and Pip around, even seeing, if they're not comfortable coming and chatting to you, even for me, having seen the work that you do and the strength that you both bring, and others in the industry bring, is really important. And you can't be what you can't see, right? Yeah. So if we've got strong people around that can actually, stand up to this whole to an industry, and probably feels a little bit like a brick wall sometimes that you're trying to, superwoman yourself through, is really, really important. And I think that, I also came up through but through the white collar, I suppose, in the industry in terms of, doing engineering at uni and, doing systems and materials and mechanics and things. The reason that I got into those roles was because I followed a group of girls, and we had probably about 20% of our year in engineering that were women, and having that sort of mass of women coming with you is really strong. And I think for new girls coming through some of these programs like the Spark Women in Construction programs as well, where you're not the only woman on site. You're not the only one having to negotiate, well, where do I even find a toilet if there even is one? Being able to actually stand up together as a collective and actually be able to ask questions that you might think, oh, well, I probably should know this, or even talking about, where to get good work boots from, and some of those things, and really being able to actually stand together as a unit, I think is really powerful. And credit to you and all of the team and all of the women that you bring up with you for really trying to help change the culture of this industry. So thank you so much. Jo, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. Thank you so much for sharing your stories and the stories of other women in the construction industry with us. Thank you for your tireless effort and the tireless effort of all of your team for making the construction industry a more inclusive and brighter place. Thank you for everyone who has listened to the episode today. If you'd like to find out more about Jo and Build Like a Girl and the other things that we've talked about on the podcast today, you can find the links in our show notes. If you've been listening to the podcast and would like to see us all in real life, this has all been recorded as a video version as well, and you can find that on the Ginninderry YouTube channel. And to hear more about how you can contribute to a brighter future for your community, subscribe to the Inspire podcast and visit our website, ginninderry.com.